Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Genomics Lite. This is our Biodiversity and Evolution series, and tonight we're looking at the big questions in biodiversity and evolution. And we're joined again by Petra, who will be talking about the evolution of mosquitoes and how humans have impacted that. Before we get started, my name's Em. I'm the Education and Learning Officer at the Wellcome Genome Campus. And in case you've not joined us before or you're new to using Zoom webinar, let me just run through how this evening is going to work. So firstly, all the events that we run on campus are here to help everyone explore the science of genomics and what it means for our daily lives. So we ask that you join us this evening in a spirit of curiosity and sharing. We welcome you to ask questions for Petra throughout our talk, but we ask you to do so respectfully. Myself and Fran are on the call to help moderate the space to make sure it is safe and inclusive for everyone. If you've not used Zoom webinar before, you'll spot that you can't use your cameras or your microphones this evening. If you need to get hold of us, if you're having any tech issues, you can use the chat box to say hello and to let us know anything that you need. If you've got a question for Petra, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of this screen that you can use to submit a question to her. And if she asks an open question to you, you can use the chat box to respond to that. We've also got closed captions available. If you click the CC box, they should pop up on your screen. You can move them around if they're in front of anything, if they're in the way, and likewise you can get rid of them if you don't want them. We'll also be using polls, so they should jump up on your screen and ask you a multiple choice question. Again, if you're having any difficulty seeing them, you can just use the chat box to reply to any answers instead. This is the third in our biodiversity and evolution series. Our previous session, we had Petra and Michelle Strickland talk about sequencing genomes, and next week we will be looking at careers in biodiversity and evolution with some partners through the Darwin Tree of Life. Information for signing up for those will be available in the Eventbrite email that you'll get tomorrow. So in normal times, we would be welcoming you to the Wellcome Genome Campus based just south of Cambridge. And so firstly, we always like to know how far away people have reached us from. So if you'd like to let us know where you're tuning in from tonight, pop that in the chat box. On campus, we've got lots of different science happening and usually a lot of scientists working here. Currently, a lot of us are still working from home as we sort of scale back up operations from the pandemic. So we've got a hello from Kent and Tunbridge Wells, so not too far. We've got a couple from Scotland and we've got someone from Colombia. So I think Colombia is definitely the furthest away from that list, although and Mauritius. So that's also pretty far away. So welcome everyone this evening. On the Wellcome Genome Campus, then we've got a few different research institutes, but the biggest two are the Wellcome Sanger Institute and EMBL EBI. Wellcome Sanger does both wet lab and dry lab, so things, doing experiments, but also using data, whereas EMBL EBI solely focuses on using data. Everything that we do on campus obviously relates to genomes and genomics, but we do that by looking at a few different areas. So we look at human genetics, things like disease and how different genes can contribute to it. We look at cancer and we're looking for ways to treat cancer. We look at cell genetics, we look at parasites and microbes, which is where Petra's area of study comes in. We also look at the Tree of Life. So next week, we've got partners from the Darwin Tree of Life project as part of our careers panel. And we obviously work with a lot of biodata. So the data we collect from experiments and how we can use that to better our understanding of biology. Before I hand over to Petra, for anyone who is doing GCSEs, A-levels or equivalents in the rest of the world, our Your Genome website is a really great place to find out more about pretty much every topic in genomics. We've got activities, videos, fact sheets, stuff like that. And you can sign up for our mailing list as well, which is where we advertise new events like this. This is the last series of Genomics Lite before we take a break for the summer. So if you sign up for our mailing list, we can let you know when our next series starts in the next academic year. And with that, I will stop sharing and I will pass over to Petra.
Okay, thank you, Em. Hi, everyone. I have already unmuted myself. Somehow it wants me to unmute myself again. Let me go to share. Great. Okay, well, hopefully everyone can see the, everyone can see the slides. Okay, So hello, everyone. Those of you that were here last week know me from the Historic Mosquito Project. Those for you that are new, hi, I'm Petra. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Welcome Genome campus, and I work on malaria mosquitoes. So when I was discussing with Em what would be a good topic to talk about for this big question session, we agreed to have a bit of an in-depth view about mosquitoes, specifically the two main topics that arise when talking about mosquitoes, which is, are they deadly or are they misunderstood organisms? And so to start this, I would like you to think about this question. So do you think all mosquitoes should be wiped off the face of the earth? Yes, no, maybe, why? Have a little think.
So I've popped a poll up, and so if anyone
Yeah,
wants to vote, have a vote, and maybe put why you've voted yes or no in the comments if you have any thoughts at this point.
there's also questions popping up that I can't open because I'm in full screen, but I see something's happening.
So most people so far are voting for no. About 80% of people are voting no. And someone in the chat box has said that the food webs might be disrupted. And someone just said that generally losing any biodiversity is potentially dangerous. So not specifically mosquitoes, but just any loss of biodiversity is a bad thing. Someone said they probably help with host organisms, so maybe they have some beneficial effects. So yeah, on the whole, there's some people that are voting to get rid of them, but quite a lot that are happy to keep mosquitoes.
Okay, that's the other way around than it was last time I gave this talk. So yes, for most of us, when we think about mosquitoes, well, most people think about mosquitoes as extremely unnecessary. And so the first part of the talk is going to focus on that part. So when people were writing in chat where they were from, most people were from the UK, Europe. There were a few people that were really far off, and I don't know from which time zones you're joining in, but hopefully it's not too early or too late. Yeah, so for most people in temperate climates, mosquitoes are nothing more than a really annoying nuisance during summer. Some people might have really bad allergic reactions to mosquito bites, but in principle, they're not that detrimental. Although if you look at this booklet from 1912, that talks about why we should exterminate mosquitoes, it says, because its bite is exceedingly annoying and seriously interferes with the comfort of those who reside in or visit districts infested with this insect. Very bold claims. However, mosquitoes, on the other hand, are also very often found in lists of animals that kill the most humans per year. So these are just 3 sources that Wikipedia lists, and in all of them, mosquitoes are first. Although the second one is always humans, which to me sounds a bit more reliable. But yeah, you have organisms like mosquitoes, humans, snakes, dogs, and then you have tsetse flies, assassin bugs, freshwater snails. You have very small critters on this list. And the reason for that is that these organisms, they don't kill humans per se, but they are vectors that carry a disease that then infects humans and kills them. And mosquitoes, seeing as they're very varied, as you're correctly pointing out, they're a big part of the ecosystem. But they also co-evolved a lot with humans. They feed on humans, so they're an extremely good vector. And they carry a variety of very different diseases, some deadlier than others. It's not that one type of mosquito carries everything. It is very, very diverse, because in order for an organism to be a vector, it needs the parasite that infects them. The parasite needs to basically infect them as it infects humans. So it needs to be able to grow within the mosquito. And so only specific mosquitoes carry specific diseases. In this case, these are the three main genera of mosquitoes. And underneath, it's which diseases they carry. So you can clearly see that some are a bit more specific and carry only one or two diseases. And then Aedes, also known as tiger mosquitoes, carry a very wide range of viruses. So again, not all mosquitoes carry all diseases. Not even all mosquitoes carry disease. Some mosquitoes don't even bite humans. And the important thing to note here is it's not the mosquitoes that kill, it's the diseases. So when you see the list here, what do you think? Which one of these mosquitoes carries the deadliest pathogen of them all?
So we've got some votes coming in. No one's going for Culex. Some are going for Aedes, but most people are going for Anopheles.
Okay. And correct, it's not the number of diseases that the organisms carry. Of course, Aedes are a big problem because they're everywhere and they are really good hosts to a bunch of viruses, but the diseases themselves are not that deadly. On the other hand, malaria is, besides for the past year and a half, the deadliest disease, the deadliest parasite disease on Earth. So in a report from 2019 said that there were an estimated 229 million cases of malaria, and of that, 409,000 deaths, which is primarily 60 to 70% children under the age of 5. So it's a pretty bad disease, and its vector is a teeny tiny mosquito called Anopheles. They're also known as marsh mosquitoes. They're the only ones that can transmit human malaria. Bird malaria, so Culex and Aedes can transmit, for example, bird malaria, but not human malaria. And it's not even all Anopheles that transmit human malaria, which is why when you talk about them, you have 3 vector statuses. You have major vector, minor vector, or non-vector. And here is a phylogeny of these. So squares are major vectors, circles are minor vectors, and then triangles are non-vectors. They either just don't live they prefer to live further away from humans, and they primarily feed on animals. Well, they exclusively feed on animals. It's the minor vector ones which are flexible, and then they don't really care if they bite humans or bite something else. And as you can see from the map, they tend to live all over the globe, including Europe. So actually, we had malaria in Europe. Do we have it still or not? Think about that a little bit. But there was a lot of efforts to get rid of malaria in northern Western countries. So Europe, the US, and this was done with a mix of vector control measures. So you would put insect screens on your windows, make sure that they're not torn. You would use general poisons such as Paris green to kill off. General poisons, yeah, you would use them to kill off the mosquitoes, but a general poison just kills everything, including being very toxic for humans. And then around the middle of the last century, something new was discovered, which was insecticides. So they were poisons that specifically killed insects, including disease-transmitting mosquitoes. And the first one was dichlorobiphenyl trichloroethane. It's colored by the name, and it's also known widely as DDT, which was the first commercially available insecticide. It was used extensively in the US and in Europe in agriculture and to get rid of disease-transmitting mosquitoes. Then it was banned because of other side effects, among other things. It was also very dangerous to insects you kind of wanted to keep alive, such as bees, bumblebees, butterflies, and other insecticides started popping up. So this is a photo from the dispersal of DDT on a beach in the US in 1945, and just a very interesting advertisement about using DDT everywhere, all the time. And so the next question is to make you think, okay, we had these insecticides since the end of the 30s, beginning of the 40s. And once you vote, I think you can see the map. So when do you think the European region, by World Health Organization standards, which is quite large and includes the whole of Russia, was declared malaria-free?
So we've got quite a mix of answers coming in. The most popular is the 80s to 90s, but there's votes for every category. But yeah, 80s to 90s is winning.
Okay.
It's pretty split.
It's fine that it's split because it's actually not such a clear-cut answer. So this is a report by the World Health Organization from 2016, where it starts that, oh, the European region was malaria-free in 1975 because the last indigenous or local case was in Macedonia in 74, only for malaria to come back to Europe in the late 80s and the 90s. I had to cut the graph here, but basically we were then back to almost 100,000 cases per year, which was mostly due to Caucasus, Central Asia, Russia, Afghanistan. There was a lot of things in Europe happening in the late 80s and early 90s, including a lot of wars and unrest, which usually comes with diseases. And then there was a very large effort to get rid of that remaining malaria. And so in 2015, which when you think about it is not that far away in time, was the first time since 1975 that the whole European region, which again includes a large chunk of ex-USSR countries, but this is the first time since the 70s that it was declared malaria-free. Just to give you an idea, I just saw a tweet yesterday evening that said for the first time this year, China was declared malaria-free. So normally we think, oh, we don't have malaria in the North Hemisphere, right? It's only in the South Hemisphere, but it's not that clear-cut. There's still quite a lot of malaria, especially in India and Southeast Asia. That is a very big problem. Not as deadly as in sub-Saharan Africa, but still a very big problem that decreases the quality of life for people. But yeah, so no one was really correct on this answer.
Someone's just asked, this is
yes.
that in India, people often think that there aren't mosquitoes in England. So do you know if there are any mosquitoes in England?
We do have mosquitoes in England. I did find, so we have Culex. They do transmit bird malaria because this is sad, but most birds living in Europe got used to living with malaria because they've been living with it for well, thousands of years. But then people brought penguins from the South Pole who are not used to malaria. And so penguins in zoos are getting malaria in Europe and in other North Hemisphere countries. So there are mosquitoes. They don't transmit malaria for now, but of course the worry is with climate change, what's going to happen as more and more diseases move north from like southern regions as mosquitoes migrate. It's a worry, and it's a bit unclear still. But definitely, so I'm from the Mediterranean. The amount of mosquitoes here is nothing. If you're not covered in red dots from head to toe, including your toes, it's nothing. Yeah. So coming back to this slide, basically, insecticides and other control measures helped a lot for a lot of regions in the world. So why can't we just use that to get rid of malaria, to get rid of mosquitoes, and subsequently malaria everywhere? And the reason is that some other regions, including sub-Saharan Africa, have a much wider diversity of mosquitoes. So it's a bit harder to target. They have just in general a much wider biodiversity compared to some other regions. But also because in the last few decades, there has been a very, very big increase in insecticide resistance, to the point that you have whole populations, so all mosquitoes sequenced in specific countries be insecticide resistant to a specific insecticide. And so people are introducing more and more different insecticides, which are causing more and more resistance. Normally, the way you would deal with this, you would, in the two bottom pictures, you would apply insecticide indoors to walls. So if a mosquito sits on it, it's gonna get insecticided. And you would sleep under insecticide treated bed nets. So if the mosquitoes tries to get to a human to bite them, they would sit on the insecticide treated bed net and die. If they're insecticide resistant, they don't die. They just continue biting and they continue spreading malaria. And because of this, our efforts to become malaria free, including sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, have slowed down quite a bit. It's not anymore the nice fall of cases that it used to be 20, 30 years ago. So it's clear we need to rethink our strategies, how to fight malaria in these cases. And so this is going back to my initial questions, and you already partially answered this. Do you think mosquitoes, thinking about, oh, we should just get rid of all of the mosquitoes, do you think that could be a bad idea, and why? So can mosquitoes be essential?
So probably unsurprising given the poll for the first one.
Yeah.
Most people are going for yes. We've got some saying maybe. So yeah, maybe not entirely sure.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of people saying no, they're not essential. And again, I think a lot of the comments we had in earlier that taking out anything can sort of disrupt a food chain. So perhaps it's not that they are super essential in their own right, but that knocking out something in a food chain is always going to have impacts elsewhere.
Those are all extremely good points, and also make my next couple of slides really easy.
Someone's also said that not all of them are dangerous. So mosquitoes as a whole group, not all of them are dangerous.
Yeah. So the next part that I want to talk about is thinking of mosquitoes as essential parts of an ecosystem. Because the first part of this talk was extremely anthropocentric, because we humans like to do that. We like to think that we're the most important thing on this planet. When, if you look at the biomass of all living organisms on Earth, So each box and each number represents gigatons of carbon that falls into each category. You see, humans are pretty low. The biggest one, of course, are plants, because plants are massive and can fit a lot of gigatons of carbon in there. Animals are a very small portion, and even out of that, the biggest portion is arthropods, which includes insects and includes mosquitoes. So we're talking about a very large chunk of just in general Earth biomass that we don't fully understand the ecology of, because again, we're very anthropocentric. If we study mosquitoes, the vast majority of research is specifically about, oh, they carry these diseases are bad. The mosquitoes are insecticide resistant. These mosquitoes live close to humans, so we should study them. And it's not very often where it's, oh, we should study these mosquitoes, as some of you mentioned already, as a very integral part of food chains, because they're very small insects. They have 3 stages that live in water, which are important foods to a lot of organisms, including fish, amphibians, other mosquitoes, other insects. And then the flying form, the adults, are then food for reptiles, spiders, other insects, birds, and then upwards and downwards. If we were to remove all of the mosquitoes from this equation, let's even say all of the mosquitoes are carrying diseases, we do not understand what would happen to the food chain. And the other point that some of you also mentioned is, not all mosquitoes bite humans. A lot of them don't really care. So you have mosquitoes that, in all mosquitoes, males almost never bite human. Pretty much never. There's maybe a few species, and it's none of the big ones, because males primarily feed on plant pollen, and they're extremely important pollinators, and we know very little about. So this is just one example. It's an orchid that is known to be pollinated by mosquitoes and other flies. When people talk about pollinators, they always talk about butterflies, bees, bumblebees, hoverflies, because they kind of look like bees, so let's put them there. But there's so many more flies that pollinate plants, including mosquitoes, that we know very little about. And yes, so exactly what will happen if we remove the mosquito from the equation is not clear. But as some of you pointed out, any loss of diversity is probably bad. And so let's stick with that notion. And so coming back to our equation of the key players in malaria, you have the mosquitoes, you have the malaria parasite, and you have humans. Let's say we don't care about biodiversity in the case of malaria parasite, and we want to get rid of them. We want to keep the humans alive, let's say. We want to keep the mosquitoes alive because we don't understand them very well, and we don't know what removing them from the equation would do. And so we should probably focus, when dealing with diseases, on the parasite part of the equation. And for this next part, I just want to briefly explain how complicated malaria is, because it's not a tiny virus which just enters your cell, starts replicating. It's a prokaryote. So it's basically similar to our cells, but it's a single cell organism. And it changes form constantly. So there's people in my group at the Sanger that do amazing work, and they have done this malaria cell atlas where they sequence the gene expression of each one of these forms as it changes throughout the mosquito. And it wasn't a human, it was a mouse, but mice also get malaria. So now they're doing this in humans. And so the parasite is going to constantly change depending on which cell it's attacking. So it starts with someone getting bit by a mosquito. The parasite sits in the salivary glands and it's then expelled into the bloodstream. The parasite reaches the liver and then enters the liver cells, changes form, and just sits in your liver. And this is the dormant stage. It then gets activated and re-enters the bloodstream as another form, which then starts replicating really fast and basically killing off your red blood cells. And this is the really dangerous phase of malaria. This is what gives you fever. Since it's killing off your red blood cells, you have less oxygen, you start feeling extremely weak, and it just keeps replicating, and you can get several rounds of fever before it completely exhausts your organism. There's different types of malaria. So there's 5 types of malaria that infect humans, and they do have different mechanisms. So some are less deadly, but they just sit in your liver basically forever. So once you get that type of malaria, you can never donate blood again because it's not clear if you still have dormant malaria parasites in you. And some others just basically kill you because they exhaust your organism with these fevers. And so once the mosquito drinks an infected person's blood, the forms again change and infect the mosquito's gut. So the mosquito isn't doing much better, but we don't really fully understand what malaria does to the immune system of a mosquito. But basically, the parasite now lives in the mosquito gut. It's using the mosquito resources to again change forms and enter the salivary glands, and the cycle repeats. So this is an extremely complex system, and we need to figure out how do we target this and how do we stop the cycle in the parasite and not the mosquito or the human. And so you might have heard about genetically modified mosquitoes. There's various ways that is done. Some are genetically modified so they have less offspring. So you just decrease the total amount of mosquitoes. Or there's this group from Imperial in London that is altering the mosquito gut genes. And so this stage where the mosquito drinks blood and normally the parasite would then sit in the mosquito gut is blocked because the mosquito gut cells, the parasite cannot recognize the mosquito gut cells and they're just digested. And it is showing some promise, but again, it's still ongoing research. And there's a bit more about this and about genetic engineering in malaria mosquitoes in this really nice Kurzgesagt video. If you want to look at it, it has, this is my favorite graphics ever because the mosquito's cuteness is unharmed, but the malaria is gone. This is the most important part. So there's other ways you can do this. Let's say more natural ways. You don't want to genetically modify the mosquitoes. And this is work that is done in some other mosquitoes. So this is not malaria mosquitoes, although this is being trialed and researched in malaria mosquitoes as well. This is done on Aedes, so the one that has all of the viruses. And it's another little, or I need to introduce another little organism called Wolbachia. Wolbachia is an intracellular bacteria, which means it needs to live inside of a cell. It's not sitting outside. And it infects a lot of arthropod species, including insects and subsequently mosquitoes. And you would think, oh, it's a bacteria that lives in your cell. That can't be good. That's probably horrible. But it is actually a symbiont. So insects that are typically infected with this bacteria are doing better than insects that aren't. And so if you look at the picture here, this is an ovary of an Aedes mosquito. In green, it's the mosquito cells, and then in blue, it's the Wolbachia sitting inside of these cells. And so female mosquitoes that are infected with these bacteria, their offspring have a better chance of surviving. So if an infected female here in green mates with either an uninfected or infected male, her offspring is just going to be fine. However, if an uninfected female mates with an infected male, she doesn't have any viable offspring and only has it with an uninfected male. So you slowly start increasing the proportion of insects in the environment that have this bacteria in them. And why is that important? Because so Wolbachia gives you better chances of survival. That's one plus. But also, it's basically like a second immune system. It protects its mosquitoes from pathogens. So if the mosquito is infected with Wolbachia, it's less likely to get all of the other viral infections to grow in it. So dengue, Zika, chikungunya, they just do not grow as efficiently, which effectively gets rid of the disease part, but still keeps the mosquito. And a somewhat lower efficiency because you do have less viable offspring in the end. And so this is, as I said, Aedes, however, it is being trialed and researched also in malaria mosquitoes. So this is on the mosquito side. What can we do on the human side? We don't really want to genetically modify humans so they're less likely to catch malaria, although there are genetic adaptations because humans have lived with malaria for quite some time. So there are genetic adaptations that humans have evolved. They're not great. One of them is sickle cell anemia. However, if you have a sickle cell anemia gene and a regular gene, you are less likely to have malaria. The problem is if you have two sickle cell anemia genes, then you have the disease. And if you have two normal genes, you're more likely to get malaria. There's some other human adaptations that are less drastic than that one. So what can you do in the human? You can take anti-malarial drugs, which stop the phase when the mosquito bites you. So the phase from the mosquito saliva entering your liver. However, you might have heard that anti-malarial drugs very often have really bad side effects. One of the more common ones can have lasting psychosis issues. So you could have lasting psychosis issues after taking it. And the other, once you already have malaria and you have the stages in your blood, is very often getting anti-malarial drugs, which the parasite is adapting to. Just as the mosquito is adapting to the insecticide, the parasites are adapting to the drugs, and there's more and more problems with drug resistance popping up. Some of the worst cases actually being in Southeast Asia. But what else can you do? And this is maybe something some of you have heard a few months ago, because it was all over the news. And it was one of the first, it's not the first malaria vaccine. There's been many. This malaria vaccine research has been going on for a really long time because, as you've seen from the cycle, this is not a simple virus that you can target one protein and it be done with it. This is an extremely complex organism. However, this year, there was a study talked about. It's not published yet. It's a preprint. Basically, you put your results out into the public before it's been peer reviewed, and more research is being done like that because the turnover is faster, especially for diseases and disease research and medical research. The idea is to spread information as fast as possible. And in this study, done between the University of Oxford and the IRSS Clinical Research Unit of Nanora in Burkina Faso, they had 450 children that they looked at over a 12-month trial. And they gave them this R21 matrix M vaccine. And this vaccine specifically, again, targets the form that would normally enter your liver because it has proteins on it that tells liver cells, let me in. And so it does have something you can target. So you tell your immune system, this is bad, don't let these guys into the liver. And for the first time, so this is the reason. This is the first malaria vaccine that in a trial had an efficiency above 75%, which is the World Health Organization mandated efficiency. Everything above this is promising. And so this looks really good, but it is an early trial. And now they need to make a bigger trial with more people involved from different regions, different countries. But it is promising. And so with that, I don't think your opinions changed that much because you've all pretty much started the whole talk thinking, oh no, we shouldn't kill off mosquitoes. I don't know if I've changed your mind. Maybe some of you now think we should kill all of the mosquitoes, who knows? But I hope you learned something you didn't know before, or you have a slightly different view of everything. Or even if you think mosquitoes are something interesting to be researched more than what we already do. Yeah, I don't know how the opinions are going over there. I just see things happening in the chat Q&A.
So most people have gone for no, and surprisingly, we've still got a few people going for yes. So I guess I'm not quite convinced everyone that mosquitoes are super important. But there are a couple questions coming in. So and if anyone's got any other questions about anything that Petra's talked about.
Yeah, just put the last slide then, which is thank you for your attention. And yes, now we can go through the questions in a bit more detail. Should I stop screen sharing?
Yes, and
okay. Okay, now I can read the chat.
Right, there we go. So someone has said that in the USA they're already using genetic approaches instead of using the Wolbachia. Do you know why, or do you think it's just that they think there's a better chance of eradicating malaria with genetic?
There's especially for AEDs. There are also actively genetically modified mosquitoes and work on them being done in Africa. I know about South America. I think it's just a matter of the way those work. So those modifications are not we modified the gut so the mosquito cannot grow parasites or viruses in there. It's we modified the males so they're less fertile. And basically the thing there is you lower the number of mosquitoes in the next generation. Most of the work that is it's still being trialed. I don't know of a single case where this works perfectly, let's do it all over the globe. So even the South America ones and the few research groups in Africa that are doing this, it is being trialed in like a smaller, some trials are promising, but it's being trialed in like smaller locations where they're seeing, oh, okay, when we did this, we didn't really disrupt that much, but we do see less mosquitoes and therefore a drop in malaria incidents. Don't remember if the South American ones were malaria. I think it was the other disease. There is malaria in South America, but I think it's more the other diseases that are the problem.
We've had one person just said that the images in your slides are amazing. Did you draw them yourself? So
thank you.
Give a shout out to your artwork.
I didn't see that comment. That's really nice. Thank you. Yes, I just before we started, I was telling Em, it's really hard to find some very specific drawings like a drawing of a person bitten by hundreds of mosquitoes. Not most of the pictures aren't really great. Half of them aren't mosquito bites, but are like bug bites, tick bites. And I'm like, that's not the bugs. That's not the bites I need. So I started a while ago just drawing my own things and putting them in slides, because then I know what I want. I can just draw it and put it there. I post a lot of science art on my Twitter if anyone wants to look at that. So a lot more mosquito drawings in there. My latest creation was a mosquito spa with a mosquito with cucumbers on her eyes and just enjoying.
I think it's also a nice way of showing that, like, if you're into sort of into science, but you also like art and design, there are lots of ways of combining it, even if it's making really fun PowerPoints. Someone who I think is still skeptical about the getting rid of mosquitoes says, how much will it really change the ecosystem if we killed all mosquitoes?
Yeah, so that's the problem, right? We don't know. We now have better ways to target mosquitoes specifically. Like I said, having males that are less fertile and then decreasing the population number down the line. So it's not insecticides, which you just throw into the wild and hope you don't kill off all of the actual pollinators that produce your food. We're past that point. But we don't know much about mosquitoes in an ecological context. We know flies are pollinators. We don't understand that very well, but there are some plants that are specifically only pollinated by flies. So I don't know if people from the island have been to the London Natural History Museum or know about the fly collection there. One of our collaborators there, Erica McAllister, she really likes to give one specific example, which is if we got rid of flies, you would lose chocolate, because flies are the only pollinators of the cocoa plant. There's no bees or butterflies or anything that are going to pollinate that, because the plant co-evolved with a species of fly. It's not a mosquito, but it is a fly. And because there's not a lot of research on mosquitoes in a more ecological sense, because that's not how you get funded. You get funded if you say, mosquitoes are bad for humans. Can we get money to research this specific topic? Then you're going to get money. People are understanding more and more, again, because of the problem of decreasing biodiversity, that, what's going on? What's happening? Decreased biodiversity seems to be really bad in general. Does that include animals that we think of as pests? Because also mosquitoes are kind of small and they are quite a bit of biomass, but they're not that extremely destructive to the environment, for example, like locusts are. So where do you draw the line? So yes, locusts are going to be a very large part of biomass, but they're also going to destroy giant areas of plants, which is going to cause decreased biodiversity down the line. It's such a complicated system, and I'm glad that more and more people are getting involved in trying to see like a broader picture instead of focusing on the like one specific thing, because that can cause some problems. I do agree that it's easy for us here in the North Hemisphere to talk, because we don't have as much biodiversity as some other areas in the world. But again, that's also a problem, because we know biodiversity is decreasing, and it's decreasing in areas of the world where we don't even know how bad the impact is, because we just don't know enough about biodiversity in those areas. This is complicated, which is why, yeah. The talk did not have a lot of data, because there is not a lot of data. Well, there is a lot of data, but it's all muddled and all over the place, and there's pros and cons to everything.
Some people have commented that it must be hard to get to study something that people consider a pest, and I guess it's that human-centric aspect of biodiversity that we want things to be biodiverse, but we kind of want it
We,
also to work
yeah,
for
yeah,
humans.
we got slightly better compared to that booklet I showed you at the beginning, which was very strongly worded about extermination of all mosquitoes everywhere at the same time. Although, to be fair, didn't mention this, and you can research this up because there's quite a lot of resources, but there used to be malaria in England. It's just England became malaria mosquito inhabitable earlier than the rest of Europe because, again, it's an island, so it's a bit of a closed off system, and it's easier to, if you have a small system, it's easier to get rid of a pest, a disease. In Europe, it was actually trialed on a little island in the Mediterranean, close to where I come from. It's a tiny island. It had maybe like 100 people living on it, and they trialed in the beginning of the 1910s to exterminate malaria on there by getting rid of ponds, getting little fish in ponds and lands of water where malaria larvae would live. So the fish would eat off all of the larvae. There would be no adults. Malaria couldn't spread. Using general poisons because we didn't have proper insecticides then, and it did work. And that was then used on other areas in the Mediterranean to get rid of, well, to decrease the burden of malaria, and it really helped a lot. And then insecticide basically killed off the rest of malaria in Europe.
We've had someone say that since malaria has been around for so long, are there no cases of gene mutations in humans to sort of mitigate getting it, I guess, other than sickle cell? Because
yeah.
sickle cell in itself isn't great. Has there not been any other spotted mutations that stop people getting it?
Sickle cell anemia is a very extreme one, but you have to realize that that's the one that involved in sub-Saharan Africa that has the deadliest malaria parasite. So as I said, there's five of them, but the two main one are Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax. Falciparum is the deadly one. Vivax is the one you cannot get rid out. It stays in your liver. It decreases your quality of life, but it's not giving you these really horrible flashes of fever that basically exhaust you to death that falciparum does. And that's the region where sickle cell anemia evolved. Because, yeah, so a heterozygous, a person that has the sickle cell anemia gene and a normal gene, is perfectly fine in that region. They don't get sickle cell anemia, and they're less likely to die from malaria. It's the other two that are at a disadvantage. But there's also people researching other mutations. They're not as extreme. I don't know if any of you might have heard about the Duffy gene, the Duffy allele. That's another one that has been shown to help with malaria in humans. And it's not like sickle cell. It's not completely making you sick the other way around. They're not, since those are not as extreme, they're mostly also because they are more evolutionary recent, it's harder to find them because it's not such a clear cut yes or no. And it hasn't been hundreds, thousands of years of evolution. It's maybe been the last 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, but it has less time to accumulate. But yeah, there's other ones.
On the flip side, someone's asked whether you've noticed anyone's noticed mutations in the mosquitoes. Where was the question? Apart from resistance to pesticides. So I guess are we affecting other aspects of the mosquito genome other than just pesticide resistance?
Yeah. So there are some projects and there is some research on other aspects, including have mosquitoes been adapting to the changing climate environment. And one way to see that is, okay, in the genome, you need to find areas of the genome that changed, and then you need to ask yourself why. So for example, for insecticides, it's very often in your cells, you have channels, and these channels basically bring ions in or out of the cell. And very often insecticides or other poisons are going to use those channels to enter a mosquito cell, cause havoc, and then the cell dies, and consequently more and more cell die and the mosquito dies. So the best way for a mosquito to become resistant is to mutate that channel. And now the insecticide just doesn't know how to enter the cell anymore. The mosquito is fine. So you have very clear genes. You're like, aha, this gene has changed. It's probably why. But then you have other genes that are changed, and you're like, why is this changed? What is going on here? On the whole mosquito, what people are looking for is, has there been change in their wing size, wing shape? Why would this, like, are they becoming bigger? Are they becoming smaller? What's going on? Those could be indications that because of the changing climate, the mosquitoes are adapting morphologically in a completely different way. Luckily, you probably have heard or seen or know about fruit flies. And a lot of people like to point out how annoying they are now during summer, where they're all over your kitchen and your compost bin. Fruit flies have been researched for 100 years now. And they're flies, so not even insects, they're flies. So their genetics, you can kind of translate a lot of that into mosquitoes. So we do have very good information from a very well-researched model organism to then be like, oh, mosquito behavior changed to adapt more to humans. And these mosquitoes had to adapt because this plot of land used to be like a foresty shrub area, and now it's all rice fields. This actually happened because, like I said, I work on historic mosquitoes. So I have some mosquitoes from an area in Burkina Faso that they were all caught in like a forest. But then on Google Maps, you go to that area and it's all rice fields now. So the mosquitoes living there today probably either are completely different populations or had to adapt somehow, because I mean, you used to live in, your great grandparents used to live in a completely different environment than where you are living now. So yeah.
We're coming up to the end of the session, so I'm going to see if we got any sort of final questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. Someone's asked sort of a nice big question: do you think it'll ever be possible to completely cure malaria? Which is sort of a different thing from mosquitoes. But I guess, do you think we'll ever maybe cure mosquitoes of malaria? Do you think we'll ever help the mosquito population?
Yeah, that is the goal. That is the hope. What was the goal? The World Health Organization has a goal, which is basically have malaria extinct by a certain year, which it kind of keeps shifting. But there is a year, there is a plan. Of course, it's a 3-body system where everyone is changing and adapting. So even for the vaccine, no one tells us that if the vaccine proves super efficient, it starts getting deployed, the malaria parasite isn't going to mutate the specific protein that it uses to enter the liver. So now the vaccine will need to be again modified for the new variant of the parasite. But on a more positive note, there has been diseases that are basically extinct in the wild. We have them in the lab, but they're extinct in the wild. And it's not just bacteria and viruses, it's also been some nematodes, so worms. Some worms are completely extinct in the wild. So it is possible. It's just not going to be simple for such a complex organism like malaria.
Awesome. Well, seeing as that was a semi-positive note, at least,
Yeah.
I think we'll wrap up there. Petra, thank you so much for joining us again this
you.
week. And again, there was more comments about how nice your drawings were. So thank you very much for bringing your beautiful
Thank
drawings back to the talk. Next week will be our last in this biodiversity and evolution series. So if you're interested in a career in this field, we'll be talking to a few different researchers at different sort of stages of research. So if you're interested in that, the information for that will be in the Eventbrite email tomorrow. But thank you very much, Petra, for joining us, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll hopefully see you next week.
Bye-bye.